Long ago, in the fertile valleys surrounded by hills and dense forests, there lay a peaceful village called Agbede. The people of Agbede were hardworking farmers and fishermen, and they lived in harmony with the land. The village was ruled by King Ayatond, a wise and kind ruler, who had seen many years of peace under his reign. The people had not known war for as long as most could remember, and their hearts were light as they went about their daily lives. Yet, even in such peaceful places, change is always on the horizon. One day, a tall, broad-shouldered man walked into Agbede, his steps slow and steady. His name was Laja, but few knew him or his past. He carried with him nothing more than a small bundle, and his face was weary, marked by years of travel and unseen battles. He settled on the outskirts of the village, where the tall trees swayed gently in the wind, and he built himself a modest hut. Laja was not a man of many words. He kept to himself, often seen tending to his small farm or sitting under the great iroko tree that stood near his home. Sometimes, children from the village would pass by, curious about the quiet man who seemed to speak more with nature than with people. Laja would smile kindly at them, but he never spoke much beyond a simple greeting. Despite his solitude, Laja was a helpful man. When a neighbor's roof leaked during a heavy storm, he appeared silently, helping to fix it. When an old woman struggled with her firewood, Laja carried it for her without being asked. His actions spoke of a kindness and strength that the people of Agbede came to appreciate, though they knew little about him. The village chief, King Ayatond, heard of Laja's good deeds. One afternoon, the king sent his advisor, Elder Ogunwale, to speak with Laja. Laja, Elder Ogunwale said as he approached the tall, silent man. The king has heard of your kindness to the people of Agbede. Though you live alone, you have shown the heart of one who cares deeply for others. Laja nodded, not seeking praise but simply acknowledging the elder's words. It is nothing, elder, Laja replied, his deep voice calm. I do what anyone would do. The elder smiled. Perhaps, but it is said that a man's actions reveal his soul. We are grateful for your presence here. Despite the elder's warm words, Laja remained an enigma. The villagers often wondered where he had come from and why he chose to live such a simple life in their village. But Laja never spoke of his past, and over time, the curiosity surrounding him faded, leaving only quiet respect. Years passed, and Agbede remained at peace. However, beyond the village's borders, dark clouds were gathering. The kingdom to the north, ruled by the ambitious King Olufemi, had begun to expand its territory. Stories of their conquest spread like wildfire through neighboring lands, and soon, the people of Agbede heard whispers of war approaching their own village. One evening, a scout from a nearby village came rushing into Agbede. His clothes were torn, and his face was pale with fear. He sought an audience with King Ayatond and the village elders. My king, the scout began, his voice trembling. The army of King Olufemi is on the move. They have taken villages to the north and west, and now they march toward Agbede. A wave of fear rippled through the gathered villagers. King Ayatond, though aged, stood tall and strong. He addressed his people with a voice that still held authority. Do not panic, the king said, though the weight of the news was heavy in his heart. We will not abandon our home, but we must prepare for what is to come. The king called for an emergency meeting with his council. The elders of Agbede, along with the village's strongest men, gathered in the king's hut late into the night. The air was thick with tension, and the flickering light from the oil lamps cast long shadows on the faces of those present. Elder Ogunwale, known for his wisdom, was the first to speak. My king, we are not prepared for war. Our young men are farmers and fishermen. They have never held swords or spears. How can we stand against an army of trained soldiers? The king nodded solemnly. I know this, Ogunwale. But we cannot simply surrender. We must find a way to protect our village. The room fell silent as the weight of the situation pressed upon them. Some suggested fleeing to the hills, while others spoke of negotiating with King Olufemi. but no solution seemed viable. It was then that Laja, who had quietly entered the meeting at the king's request, stepped forward. "My king," Laja said, his voice steady and calm, "if you will allow it, I will lead the men of Agbede in battle." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the quiet farmer who had lived among them for years. The idea that Laja, who had always kept to himself, could lead them into battle seemed impossible. Elder Ogunwale spoke first, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Laja, you are a kind man, but you are not a warrior. How can you, a simple farmer, lead us in a fight against an army?" Laja met the elder's gaze, and for the first time, there was a fire in his eyes. "I was not always a farmer, elder," he said quietly. "I have fought in battles, many of them. I know what it is to face death and to fight for survival. If you trust me, I will teach the men of Agbede to defend their home." The king, intrigued by Laja's words, leaned forward. "You have fought in battles before, Laja?" Laja nodded. "I have. But those days are behind me now. I came to Agbede seeking peace. Yet, if war is upon us, I cannot stand by and do nothing." King Ayaton studied Laja for a long moment, weighing his words. There was something about Laja, his quiet strength, his calm demeanor, that reassured the king. "Very well, Laja," the king said at last. "You will lead our men into battle. Teach them what you know, and may the gods guide your hand." And so, the preparations for war began. The days following Laja's acceptance as leader were filled with activity as the once peaceful villagers of Agbede began preparing for the battle that lay ahead. Word spread quickly through the village that the quiet farmer who had lived among them for years was, in fact, a seasoned warrior. Some found it hard to believe, while others, inspired by his bravery, were eager to follow him. Laja wasted no time. Early the next morning, he called for all the able-bodied men of Agbede to gather in the village square. There, under the rising sun, they stood in a nervous cluster, farmers, fishermen, traders, none of them having ever held a weapon for anything other than daily tasks. Yet now, they stood before Laja, hoping to learn how to defend their village from the imminent threat of King Olufemi's invading forces. Laja stepped forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the gathered men. In his hands, he held a simple wooden staff, a symbol of the kind of weapons the men would have to make do with in their defense. "You are not soldiers," Laja began, his deep voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "But you are men who love your home, your families, and your people. That love is what will drive you to fight and protect what is yours." The men listened intently, some with doubt, others with a growing sense of hope. Laja walked among them, placing a firm hand on the shoulders of the younger men, many of whom trembled at the thought of battle. "You will learn to fight, but more importantly, you will learn to work together," Laja continued. "A man fighting for himself is weak, but a group of men fighting for each other and their village is strong." The training began in earnest. Laja was a strict but patient teacher, showing the men how to turn their farming tools, hoes, sickles, and staffs into weapons. He taught them how to defend against an opponent's blow and how to fight in formation to protect one another. Days turned into weeks as the men of Agbede grew stronger, their fear gradually giving way to confidence under Laja's careful guidance. Laja's training wasn't just about physical strength, it was about building the spirit. He spent time with the men, learning their strengths and weaknesses, offering quiet encouragement where needed. He spoke to them of courage and honor, of the importance of standing together even in the face of overwhelming odds. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling training session, Laja noticed a young man named Olekona struggling to keep up with the others. Olekona was smaller and less physically strong than many of the other men, and his frustration was evident as he fumbled with his weapon. "Olekona," Laja called out, walking over to him. The young man, drenched in sweat, looked up at Laja with a mix of shame and exhaustion. "I'm trying, Laja," Olekona said, his voice shaking. "But I'm not strong enough. I'm not like the others." Laja placed a hand on Olekona's shoulder, his expression calm and reassuring. Strength is not just about muscles, he said. It's about heart. You have the heart to fight for your village, don't you? Olukono nodded, though his doubt lingered. Then that's all you need, Laja continued. The strength will come, but what matters most is that you don't give up. I believe in you, Olukono. Now, believe in yourself. Encouraged by Laja's words, Olukono gripped his staff tighter and returned to the training with renewed determination. Over the next few days, Laja continued to work with him and others who struggled, never allowing any man to feel like he was less important than the rest. As the men of Agbede trained, the tension in the village grew. Scouts sent to monitor King Olufemi's advancing army brought back grim news. The enemy forces were larger than expected, their soldiers were trained and well armed. Fear began to creep into the hearts of the villagers once more, but Laja remained steady and calm, his resolve unshaken. One evening, as the men gathered around a campfire after a long day of training, Laja sat among them, sharpening his spear. The firelight flickered across his face, casting deep shadows that seemed to mirror the weight of the responsibility he carried. We are outnumbered, one of the men, Tond, said, his voice heavy with concern. How can we possibly stand against an army like that? Laja paused, looking up from his spear. Numbers don't win wars, he replied. Strategy, courage, and unity do. We may be fewer in number, but we have something they don't. The men looked at him, waiting for his next words. We have a reason to fight. King Olufemi's soldiers fight for conquest and power, but we fight for our homes, our families, our way of life. That gives us an edge they don't have. The men nodded, though the fear in their eyes had not entirely disappeared. Laja understood their concerns, but he knew that fear was a part of every battle. It wasn't about being fearless, it was about fighting despite the fear. As the days passed, the scouts reported that King Olufemi's army was just days away. The villagers prepared as best they could. Women and children were sent to the hills for safety, while the men stayed behind, their makeshift weapons ready, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. Laja, however, remained calm. He had faced greater odds before, and he knew that the key to victory was not just in the weapons they held, but in the spirit with which they fought. He called for one final meeting with the men the night before the battle, gathering them in a circle under the stars. This battle will be difficult, Laja said, his voice strong and steady. But it is a battle we can win. Fight with courage, fight for each other, and no matter what happens, know that you are defending what is right. That is what more than anything King Olufemi's army can throw at us. The men nodded, some gripping their weapons tightly, others exchanging quiet words of encouragement. At dawn, the sound of war drums echoed through the valley. King Olufemi's army had arrived, their numbers vast and their armor shining in the early morning sun. The men of Agbede stood ready at the edge of the village, their faces set with determination, their hearts pounding in their chests. Laja stood at the front, his spear in hand, his eyes focused on the approaching enemy. He had prepared the villagers well, but now it was time to see if their training and spirit would be enough to hold back the tide. As the enemy army drew closer, Laja raised his spear high in the air. For Agbede, he shouted, his voice ringing out like a battle cry that shook the very earth beneath their feet. For Agbede, the men echoed, their voices rising in unison as they charged forward to meet the enemy. The clash of weapons rang out as the two forces collided. The men of Agbede, though fewer in number, fought with the ferocity of lions, their movements swift and precise thanks to Laja's training. They fought not just for themselves, but for their village, their families, and their way of life. Laja was everywhere at once, his spear cutting through the enemy ranks with deadly accuracy. He fought with the skill and grace of a man who had seen many battles, his every movement calculated and precise. Though the enemy soldiers were more numerous and better armed, they were unprepared for the sheer determination of Agbede's defenders. The battle raged on for hours, the sun climbing high into the sky as both sides fought fiercely. But slowly, the tide began to turn. The enemy, overwhelmed by the unity and strength of the villagers, began to falter. In the heat of battle, Laja spotted King Olufemi's general, a towering figure clad in gleaming armor, cutting down villagers left and right. With a roar, Laja charged at him, his spear raised. The two warriors met in a clash of steel, their weapons ringing out as they fought with all their might. The general was strong, but Laja was faster, his movements honed by years of experience. With a swift, deadly strike, Laja disarmed the general and brought him to his knees. The enemy soldiers, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat in panic. Agbede. Laja shouted, raising his spear once more. We are victorious. The men of Agbede cheered, their voices filling the air as the enemy fled. They had done the impossible, they had defended their village against a much larger and more powerful army, and they had won. News of Agbede's victory spread quickly through the land, and Laja's name became known far and wide. The villagers celebrated their triumph, and Laja was hailed as a hero. The king, overjoyed by the victory, summoned Laja to the royal palace. You have saved our village, Laja, King Aeton said, his voice filled with gratitude. Without you, we would have surely fallen to King Olufemi's army. For that, I wish to reward you. Laja bowed respectfully. I did what was necessary, my king. The men of Agbede fought bravely. The king smiled. Indeed they did, under your leadership. I wish to offer you a place of honor among my advisors. You would be a great asset to our kingdom. Laja, however, shook his head. I am honored by your offer, my king, but my place is with the people. I am a farmer, and I wish to return to my land. The king was surprised but respected Laja's humility. Very well, Laja. But know that you will always be welcome here, and the people of Agbede will forever remember you as their savior. And so, Laja returned to his quiet life in the village, content with the knowledge that he had protected the people he loved. He remained humble despite his fame, living out his days as a simple farmer, but to the people of Agbede, he would always be the hero who had saved them from certain doom. And so, the legend of Laja the warrior farmer grew, a tale of courage, unity, and the power of a single man to inspire greatness in others. Moral: true leadership is not about power or position but about courage, humility, and the ability to inspire others to greatness.